and deploying PHP stuff. There's no charge for this session, so you can applaud right now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm glad to be here. Like I said, my name is John Mertic. I'm with SugarCRM. Just some background about who I am. I'm the community manager for SugarCRM. And that's kind of like a new recent change for me. I came from more of a development background, and now I'm moving into more of helping manage our community, and especially interacting with our developer and partner community. I'm really, really excited about kind of taking on that. There's some contact info, Twitter, an email address. I'm also involved in the PHP project, so I have a php.net email address. This talk really won't center too much about SugarCRM as a product. If you're interested in that, I'm doing a terrific tutorial session tomorrow where I'm going to be making a business application on top of SugarCRM from scratch. So I really encourage you to come tomorrow morning, entitled SugarCRM, your next business application. Should be really kind of cool, and we're going to be building kind of a really unique application there. So now that I got the formalities for me out of the way, I want to learn about you guys. I'll have to be honest, this is the first time I've done this talk at a kind of more well-rounded technical sort of conference. I've done it at more developer conferences, so I'm kind of curious what my demographic is here. So how many developers do I have in the room? Excellent. PHP mostly, I imagine. PHP, Python, C#. You don't have to put your hands up if you don't want to. So how many non-developers, like implementers, integrators, people like that, CTOs, CIOs, people that saw this room was dark so they thought they could catch a nap? Sweet. Okay, good. So this talk is not going to be deeply technical. I'll mention probably a few technical sorts of things, but I want to kind of keep it high level. And the idea is to kind of talk about what we do internally at Sugar to build an application that can basically be deployed in a lot of different scenarios and locations. So the first natural question that comes up is, why the heck does this even still matter, right? So the first time I did this talk was at Posscon last year. And like the big boastful thing was the cloud is open. The cloud is where the future is. Open source is moving to the cloud and whatnot. Open source is going to power the cloud. And then here comes me like peddling this like deployable apps talk, like, you know, I'm the horse and buggy guy, you know, going up to Henry Ford, you know, trying to sell him, you know, a horse and buggy. But the reality is there's always going to be those industries where deployable apps are going to matter, right? Think healthcare is probably going to be a classic one where there's all these HIPAA requirements and everything in place. Think even just some other, you know, legal entities, government entities, places like that that really can't put their information up into the cloud. They're still going to depend upon having this local server. And furthermore, what is the cloud? Is it one place, or is it a series of clouds? If you're in France and you're saying I want to deploy to the cloud, does that mean I'm sending my application is going to be hosted in the U.S. or is it going to be hosted in France? Is it going to be hosted by somebody who's a vertical that's designed to do that knows my industry, that knows my requirements, that I've met, that I have personal interaction with? So even though you could say, you know, the cloud is the future, the cloud isn't a defined thing. You know, Microsoft has a cloud, you know, the Azure cloud, and it kind of has its own things going on. Amazon has clouds, Rackspace has clouds. I mean, for us at Sugar, we have our own cloud where we host, you know, applications. So there isn't this one predefined cloud. The cloud could be anything underneath it. So in order to really make an app, so I think the idea of deployability even becomes that much more important, right? Because you need to be able, so that your app can not only go to anybody's environment, but to anybody's cloud. And that gives your customers the ultimate freedom of what they want to do with their software. Oops. Oh, okay, we're back. Sorry about that. Okay, so in this talk, what I'm going to cover kind of 4 basic topics. We're going to talk about writing portable code, and it's not really the focus. And I know the title probably seems misleading, you know, writing deployable applications, you know, with PHP. And so you kind of think, oh, it's going to be some guy, you know, showing all sorts of crazy things you can do with PHP, right? And the reality is building an application has, only a small portion to do with actually writing the code, but there's a lot of other pieces at play. How you design it, how you test it, how you, measure performance on it. So I'm going to kind of split up the topics that way. We'll talk about writing portable code, or at least making a reasonable good attempt to. We'll talk about making it customizable and configurable for your user and what their needs might be, and even the developers who might be working on the product and administrators. We'll look at some strategies about quality assurance, both from kind of the automated tool standpoint and then the real person actually, trying out it standpoint. And then we'll kind of touch upon, making the thing actually perform reasonably well. And the challenges with it, because with an application like this, you really can't say, this is the exact architecture I'm dealing with. You kind of have to be a little bit vague, so you have to kind of do those, best guesses and things like that and try to detect your environment. So let's talk about portable code. So I found this picture, and it kind of really illustrates, like, as we've went through computing, there's been all sorts of platforms, all sorts of different operating systems, all sorts of different things that's kind of developed over time. And it's always been a challenge. It's always been a challenge to make the right ones run everywhere sort of mentality. And not even so much in the development of it, but just the support of it. I mean, even if you got the thing running, being able to have this entire support matrix and figuring all these things out, it's very complicated, and especially from a developer, you're tasked with having like 50 different VMs of all the combinations and things like that. It really, really, really makes it difficult. So when we looked at the problem, we said, okay, we want to make sure we're not limiting our customers. We don't want to say, in order to run SugarCRM, you must be on this version of Linux, with this version of MySQL, with this version of PHP. You must have your permissions exactly like this, and you have to have all of your stuff in one little neat package, right? We didn't want to do that because we want to give our users freedom, whether they're open source users or whether they're commercial users. We want to give them freedom to put their app wherever they want. So when we're looking at this, we're like, okay, well, what can we do to at least kind of give a little bit of a boundary? So we said, okay, let's define a support matrix. So we said, okay, we'll take anything Unix. Those are good. We'll even take Windows, because there's people that like to use that. Actually, it's a very, surprisingly, with PHP applications, it's a very actually surprising growing segment. And really, I know they spoke in the morning keynote about Microsoft, embracing more open and everything like that. And there's probably some people that were kind of like poo-pooing that. But really, really, they've done really great jobs in the PHP world and really making that a first-class platform, or first-class application on their platform. We've seen kind of the growth of that as a result. So we support Apache, IIS, MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle. So we've kind of defined this very broad range of what we support, which should kind of make a good catchment for everybody, for what you're deploying on modernly. And then we say on the PHP side, 5.2, 5.3, they're the most recent versions. Most of the, we don't want people to have to go and tinker their PHP version to death and having to flip all sorts of options. So whatever the most common options, we'll try to detect if you're using something more obscure and tell you it's a bad idea, and so on and so forth. And just kind of expect the most common things. And then we say, okay, now that we kind of have this sort of generic baseline, now let's start to design the code that can work well within this matrix. And what we find is the key is you kind of, it's often as a developer, you kind of often want to cheat and you want to go right to the bare metal when you're writing code. And the reality with this is you kind of almost have to extract yourself out a little bit. So like in the database layer, you're going to want to be building using ORMs and things like that to kind of encapsulate away from where you're writing actual database code specific to one database, and instead kind of keep it more generic and at a higher level. Making sure you're not using specific PHP features that may require a specific extension to be enabled or something like that, and then just really trying to detect what's available. So one popular thing we do, for those who are really familiar with PHP, there's a lot of different caching engines on the back end for using as a user cache, an external cache. So probably people are familiar with APC or Memcache or Redis. I think there's a handful of other ones. So we try to detect that, hey, you have that enabled. Great, we're going to use it. And you don't have to do anything because we'll just use it. We see that you have it out there. It looks like it's reasonably well configured. Let's just try to use it. And being able to detect those sorts of things and write directly kind of makes it a lot easier for us then to adapt into an environment. And the other thing is you can't really take assumptions. You can't just assume that everybody's going to have their permissions set a particular way. Like one really common example we run into when we have people that move back from Windows to Unix, or even from different varieties of Unix, right? Is that some file systems are case sensitive and some aren't. So having to think about that, we will have code that will end up, the developer will start writing on one operating system that isn't case sensitive. They'll test it on one that is, and all of a sudden, oh, we got problems. We have to look into this. So things like that to think about. And PHP is a really good language. People knock it all the time. You kind of have to think of a little bit of the history of how it formed. There's this really cool guy, Rasmus Lerdorf. I don't know if anybody's ever heard him speak. If you have, great little Danish guy, coolest guy in the world. And a lot of how the language was developed wasn't developed, we would argue, by language linguists, i.e. People that really are looking at it as in a pure art and form and everything like that. It was developed from a pragmatic approach, right? It was meant to solve a problem. That's the kind of guiding philosophy behind PHP. It's not this overbearing. It's not this thing for purists. It's something that solves a problem. It's glue that ties different pieces together. And that's kind of like what the LAMP stack is in a sense. It's all these individual pieces, and you have PHP at the core of it that kind of pulls them all together and makes it one cohesive whole. So as a result of that, a lot of times the PHP functions are a little bit hokey. And a little bit kind of weird to deal with, and especially database functions.